Yeah, so Jacob and Mag has another super funny, interesting article out. I basically read these just for entertainment purposes only. It's by our favorite author, Ben Burgis. And I guess he had a debate with a conservative, Charlie Kirk. And he made a point and decided to expand upon his point in this article. Now, what was the point that he made? Basically, he was saying that, hey, conservatives, you always talk about the boogeyman bureaucracy. Well, hey, if you hate bureaucracy, you should be a socialist. Support socialism, support expansion of the government. And to everybody else, even I'm pretty sure, even socialist Jacobin readers, they're like, huh, scratching their head, like, what the fuck? How is this possible? What kind of pretzel logic you have to twist to come up with this? All right, here we go. This is how he's going to explain it. Hate poverty, become a socialist. Right-wingers oppose social programs like Medicare for all on the grounds that they create powerful new bureaucracies, but it's mean-tested benefits, not universal programs that empower bureaucrats to act like petty tyrants. Okay, so he's talking about his had a recent debate with Charlie Kirk, and Charlie Kirk said, social safety net is fine when it comes, but when that net becomes an overly generous hammock, it empowers government bureaucrats rather than ordinary people. As I explained in the debate, that's completely wrong. Bureaucrats are empowered not by broad and generous social programs, but by means testing. It's democratic socialists, not capitalist defenders, that want to give bureaucrats less sway. Here's the deal. When you give government more money, more funds to redistribute, it empowers them, right? Now, technically, yes. I mean, hypothetically, in this hypothetical scenario, let's say you get rid of all these social benefits and replace it with universal basic income that everybody qualifies for. Well, I guess you could technically in this in this laboratory experiment see a way you can get rid of all these government bureaucrats. And boom, just replace it with an efficient program. Everybody's happy. Everybody can spend their $1,000 check the way they want. There's no means qualifying. There's no testing. But that's not the way it's going to work. I mean, even if you have a UBI and you get rid of all these, bureaucracies from the government, inequality and other social ills will not go away. So all these bureaucrats will creep in again. And so for socialism and bureaucracy, like, are you fucking kidding me? I mean, when people first of all, why is he surprised? When people hear the word socialism, that means government-owned shit, right? Government-owned, that means production. So if the government owns it, of course you're going to have a bunch of bureaucrats. Like if the government owns any factory, you're going to have a bunch of bureaucrats making political decisions about what the factory makes. So obviously this is pretty linked. If you're giving more money to the government, you're going to have more bureaucrats to manage that money. I mean, that's just the laws of bureaucracy. The bureaucracy wants to expand itself because the bureaucrats want to have more and more people under them. They want to be more important. That's what it incentivizes. I guess you can try to thread this needle like he's saying that, well, if all these programs are universal, you just give it out to everybody, and then you won't have means testing. And if you won't have means testing, you can get rid of these bureaucrats. But it's kind of hard to believe. It's like oil and water; they don't seem to mix. The idea that more socialism means more bureaucracy seems obvious to many people, but why? It's true that democratic socialists want to strengthen our regulatory state with environment protections and laws against union busting and racial discrimination. But it's also true that these types of policies involve empowering officials who work in offices and spend a lot of time filing paperwork, i.e. bureaucrats, to enforce them. Okay? But less than 10% of the U.S. population are business owners. To be sure, that's a category that includes far more small business people than genuine members of the economic elite. But the idea that regulation empower bureaucrats at the expense of the great masses of ordinary people doesn't make much sense in terms of pure arithmetic. A person in the United States is vastly more likely to be a worker protected by labor regulations than a boss dealing with annoying regulators. And here where Ben Burgis makes a pretty basic kindergarten error, okay? You could be burdened by labor regulations being a worker, obviously. Duh. Just because the boss will be, the business owner will be the one to get fined, and that makes the business owner very bureaucratic and has to follow all these laws and have like a what do you call it? Like an HR department. That's not the business's fault. That's not the business wants to. I'm sure if you had basically a much more open labor market where the boss can fire you for any reason, and then they just get away with all these laws, HR departments would be superfluous, or be a lot less bureaucratic, a lot more streamlined. You want a paycheck? Here's your paycheck. Hey, the employer doesn't like your hat? You're fired. Here, no bureaucracy. You can have one person. You might not even need an HR department at all. So it's the government and all these laws that make the company bureaucratic, and you can be a worker. I mean, let's say the government says that, hey, if you're a full-time worker, your employer has to buy your health insurance. Well, what is a full-time worker? You have to work 40 hours. Okay, well, a company doesn't want to pay your health insurance or can't afford to, so you'll be working part-time. They have to have twice as many people working part-time. Now, there's a bureaucracy now to keep track of how many hours maximally each person can work. But the worker is suffering because of that. But it's not because of the employers, because of the government laws. So yeah, this is nonsensical. Yeah, no shit. So less people, 10% of the people are quote unquote business owners, but the average person is, I mean, yes, Ben Burgis can think, they have some certain labor regulations that help people, that protect people, but also how much labor regulations actually hurt people. Ben Burgis can't possibly think that, hey, there are labor regulations that actually hurt people and bog them down. The economic connection might make more sense if we shift to focus from regulatory politics enacted under capitalism to socialism as a post-capitalist economic system. Under capitalism, economic enterprises are owned by individuals or stockholders. Anyone who ever had to deal with a human resource department knows that corporations could be as bureaucratic. No, that's bullshit. That's a red herring. They're bureaucratic because of the government bureaucrats, not because they want to be. What an idiot point. This isn't only possible from a post-apocalyptic economy, though. For example, firms producing consumer goods could be collectively owned and democratically operated by the workers themselves. Oh, that's not going to be bureaucratic. Could you imagine if you have to vote for everything? Vote for how much people, what kind of, instead of one owner deciding, making executive decisions about what products to produce, who gets paid, who gets fired, who gets promoted. We're going to have a committee, a socialist committee of workers decide that by voting. Talk about politics, bureaucracy. Wow. Even if we're talking about the Soviet system, the power of bureaucrats didn't come from the fact that Soviet citizens enjoyed social services more expensive than Americans. Similarly, if we're talking about practical democratic social and policies like Medicare for all, advocated by socialists as to reforms within capitalism, nothing about these measures would strengthen the power of bureaucrats. Exactly the opposite's true. So you're saying that countries with Medicare for all or free, quote-unquote, free healthcare, they don't have bureaucrats deciding how long you're going to wait for an operation, what operations are covered, and what operations you just or medicines you can't get. Of course they do. It's complete fallacy that, or accounting error that Medicare has, like, apparently, like, socialists love to tout that, oh, well, you know, insurance companies, look, they spend 30% of the profits on, like, bureaucrats or paper pushers, where Medicare for all, they spend 2% of their budget on, like, you know, like, administrative expenses. But first of all, Medicare is so full of fraud that if you add up all the profits from private healthcare insurance, they would be dwarfed by the amount of fraud it's on Medicare. So, and it's just an accounting fallacy. You can look it up, but this is complete bullshit. Here we go. Here's another bullshit point. Means testing and bureaucracy. Consider K-12 public schools in the United States. In the current setup, they are free at the point of service, but we could imagine a means tested version of the public school system. Only families below a certain threshold would be able to send their kids to school for free. Well, first of all, I went to a public school, and I remember somebody who was living outside of the public school zone, was living in the suburbs, rented an apartment. So they apparently they tried to qualify. You know, they got busted eventually. So they do have bureaucrats looking at people's addresses, and not anybody can just go to this, you know, the quote unquote free public school. And actually, there's a way to get, you know what I mean. So there's a way to get rid of the bureaucracy. Everybody just gets a school voucher. Hey, if you have a kid a certain age, here's a school voucher, and here's your bureaucracy. Take it to whatever for-profit school or public school you want to. How about that? Which do you think would involve more aggravating interactions with bureaucrats? Enrolling your kids in the local public school in that world or this one. In both scenarios, you have to fill out some information, either that an office or website that would eventually reach some with an office job. But the key difference is that in our world, people in those offices didn't exercise much influence over the outcome. If you live in the... Well, first of all, this is so idiotic. I mean, guess who is the most powerful political entity in the United States? The teachers' unions. Where do they get their money? You guessed it. Tax dollars. So these teachers' unions take tax dollars. Like you're mandated. You go to jail if you don't pay, or your house will be confiscated. You know, they set up their own teacher union bureaucracy, their union, what hours they can work, how much kids per classroom, who gets promoted. Hugely bureaucratic. You can't fire bad teachers. I mean, that is the hornet's nest of bureaucracy, right? Then they spent their union funds lobbying for politicians that they bargain with, and basically once the politician knows that the only reason that they're in office is because of this union, so they're basically bargaining with the person that hired them. So you can see that, you know, this is like one bureaucratic hand washing another. Happily, we don't live in that world, at least for pre-college public education. But we very much do live in that world when it comes to healthcare. Are you a low-income person applying for Medicaid? The public sector bureaucrats will take a hard look at whether you're poor enough to qualify. If you're a middle-income person, well, but wouldn't have wouldn't a bureaucrat checking your income eligibility be much fucking cheaper than providing free healthcare to everybody? Would that be a little more efficient? Tell someone in the country with universal health insurance about these expenses and they'll look at you with a mixture of horror and amusement and pity. More than one American who's moved to such a country has noted the liberating experience of realizing that they never have to talk about health care they're receiving with anyone who isn't a doctor or a nurse. Yeah, I suppose for most routine checkups, but heaven forbid if you need some like complicated knee replacement surgery, or you need to see a cardiologist about a heart attack you're experiencing. You might be waiting for a few years. You might die before then. Taking sectors of the economy like healthcare and higher education entirely out of the market with no ifs, ands, and means testing. It's very good for many reasons. People stay in terrible jobs, even if abusive marriages, for fear of losing their health insurance. Gay children of fundamentalist parents have a good reason to worry that their parents might stop writing tuition checks if they come out of the closet. Oh, Jesus. When right-wingers try to scare people with vague talk of bureaucracy, they're appealing to understandable human urge to avoid having to jump through hoops and justify ourselves to petty gatekeepers. I mean, I mean, it's kind of speechless too, because yes, make everything free, and yeah, in this hypothetical world, you get rid of bureaucrats, but then what about the bureaucrats that it will take at the IRS to basically take more than half of your paycheck? Isn't that a petty tyranny? I'd say I'd want the bureaucratic hoops you have to jump through to get welfare and to get freebies from the government than having this giant government that eats up like 70% of the GDP, and when you get a paycheck they automatically take, or like if you have a business, they comb through all your financial records and take 70% of your profit. I mean, talk about a hellscape. But their argument doesn't make any sense. If you don't want to give government officials control over your life, you shouldn't want them to have power to decide whether you qualify for basic goods like education, healthcare, and housing. Well, you can have a first of all, you can just, how about this? You can just cut those programs. That's way less bureaucracy. But if you must have them, well, you can have a lean department that just checks people's qualifications and only gives the healthcare and the housing to really desperate people that actually need it, rather than to everybody, because if it's to everybody, government fucking spends most of the GDP in the economy, and now so much of the people are reliant on the government for these generous benefits. Voting them away, or you're creating such a strong voter base that anybody that would run to cut them or to curb them, or if the country's running into a financial disaster, well, good luck running against that. You should want to live in a society where receiving such benefits is regarded as a right that everyone has by virtue of being a human being. No, you don't. By virtue of being a human being, you don't have the right to enslave other people. You don't have the right to other people's time. You don't have the right to other people's labor hours just because you live in a geographical proximity to them. In other words, if you're worried about overzealous bureaucrats, you should be a socialist. Or you can just cut the welfare state. How about that?